northern soul. But what?
Podcast time. Right.
Yeah. But can I just say, wonderful to see you again after my inaugural podcast. And it is my great pleasure to introduce my father again, Mike Hurst, for those who don't recognize him. He's produced a few hit records in his time, just a few. He's also, sung on quite a few hit records. But Dad, thank you for being here. And it's, the fact that we can delve into some of the stories behind the hits. So, for example, the first cut into the deepests. But, again, how music, or it was an era, the late 60s, 70s was an era where there was a huge musical change. So it wasn't just the style of productions, it wasn't just, but also there were now more after, the record industry, your Deccas, and EMIs controlling 97% of the pop market. All of a sudden, those Island Records, Immediate and Bell, which is, you had an awful lot of involvement with. And I mean, the likes of, some of the stories you've told me over the years about some of these, I say characters, and we'll keep them as characters, but the likes of Andrew Loog Oldham and his long lunches.
And having his blood changed. Regularly.
So it must have been a little awkward sometimes saying, oh, by the way, Andrew, I want to go into the studios and... So
all this started in the 50s. You have to realize that. But no one was a name in the 50s. If you were a record producer, you worked for a record company. Nobody knows who produced Gene Vincent, Bebopaloola. It's one of the best produced records I've ever heard. Incredible. For the technology that was around in those days, it was amazing. But when we move into the early 60s, that's when the independent producers suddenly came along.
But who, and again, I mean, who were your kind of influences? I mean, was it a Johnny Fran? I mean, these people, Johnny Fran, I hear about. I mean, who were they? Were they producers, or were they?
No, they were like insurance salesmen, most of them. That's no detrimental comment about insurance salesmen. Why should it be? But no, they were staff people. They worked for the record companies. And some of them are musicians. Johnny France was a musician. He played piano for various cabaret artists. And suddenly he moved into the pop market big time in the late 50s. And like they did with the major record companies.
But weren't they also doing everything? Like they were having to find, and did you had to find the musician, you had to find the song, you had to find the plugger, or what was it they were called? Exploitation.
Exploitation managers. I mean, it makes it sound like a sex.
Yeah, it doesn't sound very record industry like. I'm in the exploitation market.
It's not good. But plugger's better. I like the word plugger.
Yeah.
They were pluggers. And they were like Tony Hall was the first great plugger for Decca. And he was also a guy who fronted Oh Boy. Here, can you imagine, there's a guy already then in his 30s talking to a teenage audience, and now coming up for you, we've got the fantastic. And you think, who the hell is this? He's like my grandfather. But he was a great plugger nonetheless. Tony.
And how much were these people being paid? Were they being paid big money? And were they going off to your Radio Londons? Or, I mean, how were they plugging it for you? I mean, was there just a lot of money being given to...
No, let's get this right. What was really funny, you couldn't imagine this today at all, could you? The big record companies, let's say Decca and EMI, they funded their own plugger programs on Radio Luxembourg. So you had a half-hour show, Decca Tonight or EMI Presents, and they play all their own records, which would seem slightly unfair to everybody else who wasn't involved with it. Yeah. So, yeah, it's true.
What was in those kind of late 50s, early 60s, what was the kind of big radio station?
Radio Luxembourg.
It was Radio Luxembourg.
Luxembourg was the only one. BBC, you see, the good old BBC. They wouldn't play rock and roll. They tried to avoid it. And Radio
Why?
Lux,
Because they didn't understand it? Or?
they thought it was trash music. So they really didn't play much of it. So Radio Luxembourg did exactly the same thing. They played it full time.
I always love the the story of some of those again the pirate radio stations with again friends of yours that I mean I remember used to walk through the house every now and again, and also with CP was the great story of Maurice Cole, commonly known as Kenny Everett to the rest of us, but basically being put on Radio London to promote, and basically Radio London I think was being sponsored by, was it Pt2?
Yep.
And that CP Dad had put him on Radio London, and he had a phone call pretty swiftly after something like 20 minutes of Kenny Everett going on radio, saying, get him off, because I think his opening lines was, and here we are from Radio London, and which wasn't a very good sign because they were being sponsored by Pt2, smoothest by far.
Yeah, but it was a revolution. You have to understand that. In fashion, in music, in films, the early 60s was a revolution. Everything changed. It's like it changed overnight. Pirate radio was coming in 63. All these things were happening. Unpluggers, exploitation managers, whatever you want to call them. The pluggers were everything too. Dave Most, Mickey Most brother, was a great promotion man. And who else we got there? Do you remember any of them? The promo guys?
Well, no, the only one
Dave Bridger.
David
Bridger was the rudest man I've ever met in my life. He would have been in prison today. No, really, his sexual exploits were unbelievable.
Here comes the exploitation again.
But he was so crude, and I mean, he would have been inside today, no doubt about it. But he was a great plugger. God, he was good.
It was Kenny that made Queen huge, wasn't it?
Kenny
Bohemian Rhapsody, played it 3 times in a row.
Yeah.
10-minute song.
Yeah.
You could do that.
The pluggers were all important. Well, you could do it on pirate radio.
Yeah.
But that time I suppose for everyone, but especially for the likes of the independent record producer like yourself, you'd been a pop star, you'd come out, you'd come out the other side being told by my mother, I think you need to get a proper job now because there are children involved.
Your mother saying you ought to get a proper job now. Her mother, my late mother-in-law, she said to my future wife, there's something wrong with him. He wears a leather jacket. You see, and I loved it. Thought it was great.
But it must have been so exciting at the time, where it was fun because there were no colleges. Everybody was. I mean, let's face it. You were living on your wits, weren't you? Because you were learning as you went along. You were still having fun, weren't you? Because you were learning and you were picking.
Everything moved in tandem. That's what was interesting. This revolution I talked about. Everything moved in tandem. The music, the technology, the artists, it all raced ahead like that. So suddenly you had people realizing Decca, EMI, all these big companies weren't the answer. The answer was you as an individual. You came along and said, I can do this. I can make that. I think this is a hit. I think that's it. And people started to listen at last to people who are actually making the music. They never listened before. Corporations made the decisions. But it changed so fast.
But yeah, it was that kind of era of change, wasn't it? Really, yeah. I mean, dramatic musical change, and it wasn't just, as you said, the rise of the independent record producer and but all those companies. So, for example, hopefully you'll be talking about the likes of Immediate. You had, of course, Ireland, but then Immediate wasn't long behind.
No. That's why it all happened, I said so quickly, happened in a space of 3 or 4 years. And Ireland were at the forefront, immediate would later be. But immediate's the nerve of people. I was sitting in a dressing room with Del Shannon. And
Oh, I love this story.
Del, there was a knock on the dressing room door, so I got up, I was close, opened the door, this guy's standing there, all his gingery hair and shades. This would have been 63. And he said, is Mr. Shannon here? So I said, well, yeah. I said, who are you? He said, I'm Andrew Lou Goldham. I said, really? He said, yeah. He said, I'd like to meet Mr. Shannon. So I turned around and said to Del, do you want to talk to this guy? And Del said, yeah, why not? So Andrew came in and said to Del Shannon, who does your publicity for you? And Del Shannon said, so-and-so, so-and-so, so-and-so. And Andrew said, they're doing a crap job. I can do a better job for you. And Del looked at me and said, you think he's serious? And I said, oh, sure, sounds like it. And he signed a publicity deal with Andrew. So Andrew had the balls and the forefront to think, I can do this. And he did, and that was typical of the day. And that's where Andrew began as a publicist before he founded Immediate Records.
And did he have, was he financing himself? Did he have a backer or,
Andrew was, again, like everybody else, Andrew screwed all sorts of people to get the money in from various quarters to keep running. So he found it from somewhere. He didn't have any money himself. He found it somewhere. And he had a wonderful partner called Tony Calder. And Tony was an East End boy. And Tony used to say to me, Mike, he said, what I like about you is you and I are the same. I looked at him for a moment and he said, we got class. I smiled at Tony. Tony would later try and take over Immediate from Andrew with me. He said, we'll get rid of Andrew. We'll have a proper record company. That was his plan.
Oh. Yeah. But, and again, I know that you produced a lot of artists for Immediate, but was there an intention with Andrew Lou Goldham to have a similar kind of running of Immediate like an EMI stroke?
No, remember the quote, happy to be a part of the industry of human happiness. What a lot of rubbish.
I was just about to say, what the hell does that mean?
That was on his record sleeves of every record. What does it mean? I had no idea what it meant. But neither did Andrew. That was the great thing, because Andrew would just have another spliff. And all that happened was Tony, his partner, used to say to me, Andrew's coming out of it. Quick, we've got to give him some more. And they hand him over another spliff, and Andrew said, Mike, he said, it's great, I'm signing up Stevie Marriott and the Small Faces. And he said, really? He said, yeah. He said, they're coming in to do this. And there'd be a cloud of smoke in his office. And I didn't use the stuff. But intravenously, I probably got it sitting with Andrew. Because there was...
Because it was just one big cloud.
Yeah, big cloud.
What was his mate called? Eddie, was it? Fast Eddie or something?
Oh, Eddie, his chauffeur.
Who used to make sure that...
Eddie, quick, roll Stevie Marriott another joint. He's coming out. And they'd all be, the whole place, it was mania. It was lunacy.
But that was one hell of a coup by Andrew Lou Goldham. However good, bad, or indifferent he was as a publicist. To actually have the Small Faces, Benny Boy. What did we do there? We got high, and that's exactly how we. You know.
Well, there's a story about that which I can't tell because we could all be sued.
Oh.
You had to.
Well, maybe, yeah.
And no, just to say, dear Stevie, who I thought was wonderful.
Actually, I know this, you don't know this, but and people, sorry, you don't know. I'm an ex-estate agent, but one of my clients is Stevie Marriott's daughter, Molly, a great singer in her own right, and also her godmother. I think it is P.P. Arnold's, of course, who Dad also produced. What a roster! Roster of artists to kick off with, the Small Faces, and also again. Stevie Merritt, what a great bloody songwriter.
Look at all the links in this. I've always said somebody like me, simply because it's been such a long time, all the strands feed into one another. You talk about P.P. Arnold, and First Cut is the deepest, and you're saying Godmother to
Molly Marriott.
to Molly Marriott. I knew Stevie, his mum had a theatre school in London. My mum had a theatre school in London. Like Phil Collins' mum had a theatre school in London.
And they both played Oliver, or
Yeah.
the other one?
No, he played the Artful Dodger.
Oh, Artful Dodger, that's right.
But all these things tie in. All the strands tie in. It's quite fascinating, actually.
And again, is that just seems to me like the 60s. Everybody seemed to be moving in the same direction they wanted, and they could make it happen.
Hey, you felt
Today.
you felt you could do anything. Today, and I'm so sorry for younger people today, because they're hidebound by when they're at school. You gotta go to university. You've gotta get this. You've gotta do that. But hey, being young, that's the whole point of stretching out, reaching out, and doing something for yourself. And in the early 60s, young people suddenly got this feeling, I can do that, I can do this, I can be in fashion, I can be in movies, I can be in music. Fantastic. All that opportunity suddenly was there. It presented itself. That was what was so great.
But it didn't seem to me that there were too many walls being put up where today, if you want to do anything, there's a bloody door and the thing is, you've got to kick it down.
You do.
As long as you actually had the same-minded people who wanted to make it happen.
There were no walls. By 64, 65, there were no walls. They're gone. And you were doing what you wanted to do. And you could tell a major record company, you wanted to sell your record, your new artist, to them. You could tell them, you could say, this is a hit, and they'd probably sit there and go, oh yeah, sounds like a hit. They really wouldn't know. So they depended on you as a producer.
So basically, if you had the gift of the gab,
Oh, sure.
you were kind of there, really.
Yeah.
In terms of like Bell though, what was your involvement with Bell?
Bell Records, Larry Utah, who founded Bell Records, was one of the first, for me, one of the first great record men. He was a fantastic guy. He recognized talent, always. And he came down to our house here in Henley. A lot of times, you won't remember.
No, I don't.
But he did. And he gave me a big leg up with Bell Records because, of course, he started Bell Records, his company.
But how? Yeah, but why did he give you a step up when there were other Mike Hursts about? But don't get me wrong. I'm sure a lot of some of your competitors. When I say competitors, I mean your Denny Cordells and whatever. Why? How come he chose you?
He liked me.
And it's that simple.
That's all you can say. He liked me. I mean, it's that simple. I mean, I've been with other people in the music business who didn't like you. And it was pointless trying to convince them that something was a hit. Waste of time. But Larry was one of those people that just said, we'll go with the kid.
We'll go with the kid. So what was the first single album artist that you put to Larry Utah and he said, yeah, I love it? Or
Eddie Hardin and Pete York from the Spencer Davis.
And was that directly after Blackwell had basically said, I want the pop market, I'm going to replace Spencer Davis with Traffic? Is that when? And tell me, I know you talk. How did you meet Eddie Hardin? I mean, and were Eddie Hardin and Pete York, did they know each other? Because Pete York was one of those jazzers, wasn't he?
He was a jazz drummer. I didn't like the way he drummed, I have to say that, because I'm a rock drummer. But I listened to technically he was great. It was a different style of music. Eddie Hardin, who was brought in to replace Stevie Winwood. Eddie Hardin was...
You had that. You doing?
He was a rich man.
Second class, weren't you?
Yeah, he was a rich man's son. So when I pulled up outside the studios in my car, on the other side of the road, I saw this drop-head Rolls Royce and this kid getting out with sunglasses on. And I said, "Who are you?" He said, "I'm Eddie Hardin." I said, "Oh, you come to replace?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Who's looking after you?" Pointing at the car. He said, "Oh, my dad bought it for me." It's wonderful. You're in the music business, your dad's bought you a Rolls Royce. And he was 17.
So then you were having all that success, you know, when you were younger and whatever. How come I didn't get given for my 17th birthday party
I could tell you why.
a roller?
Because there were 6 of you.
Keep forgetting about my brothers and sisters, because it's always about me, folks. It's always about me. Forgot about my brothers and sisters. But the other thing is, he was like C.V. Winwood. I mean, the organ. He was also a great songwriter. He also had a bloody great voice. And Ben, can we play that Hardin and York single?
Yes.
And again, they weren't your classic, should we say, singles band here, but they were very much this is one.
Yeah.
But it was very much, they were kind of founders of prog rock, really, because it was all very much organ.
In a way, listen very quickly. The whole story of Spencer Davis, we know the whole story with Steve Winwood, of course. He had a fantastic voice. They had several big hit records, no problem at all. But Spencer Davis himself, bless his heart, dear old Spencer, he thought he was a great blues guitarist. He wasn't. He thought he was a singer. He wasn't.
And he wasn't.
And so what we had to do is really embarrassing. We'd be in the studios, and I want to put Eddie Hardin's voice on, and Spencer wanted to sing, and it was his group. So we say to Spencer, "The roadie's not here, be about midnight." He said, "We're all starving hungry." And so Spencer would say, what can we do? I said, "I tell you what, Spencer," I said, "why don't you nip off to the Wimpy bar down the road and get us some cheeseburgers?" And he went. And when he'd gone, we put Eddie Hardin's voice on instead. And Spencer would come back with the cheeseburgers, and he'd listen to it and he'd say, "I sound really good, don't I?" He thought it was him.
You didn't kind of want to
No, bless his
pull the rug from underneath his feet.
I couldn't do that. He always believed. It's really funny.
But I remember the likes of Pete York and Eddie Hardin coming over to the house a lot. And Pete York never looked, as far as, you know, as a kid, thinking of, oh, by the way, pop stars, rock stars, and whatever. He didn't look.
No.
Pete York, he never looked. Always looked like somebody who had just kind of should actually be in a jazz bar somewhere. But,
Yeah, he did. You're quite right.
But I always remember him being such a lovely guy. But was that the first artist that you had on Bell, or?
Yeah. When Trevor Churchill was running it.
And he was, again, he produced a lot of artists, didn't?
Well, Trevor.
Yeah.
Actually, he did produce a few, but more than anything, he ran the record company for Larry Utah.
And when did they start? Because I mean, with Bell, you always associate David Cassidy, but actually more the glam rock. So, you know,
Okay.
and I don't call
Okay.
Shawoddy glam.
Okay, everybody has to have someone to lead a company to make it work. I've mentioned Larry Utah. The next guy was, of course, the infamous, wonderful Dick Leahy. Dick Leahy was another British record man, fantastic record man. And he signed up, dare I say the name, Gary Glitter. Shock horror, Gary Glitter.
Oh, hang on. Let's have a little bit of Gary Glitter. Because actually, he sold a hell of a lot of it.
Yeah, he did. It's a pity he sold a lot of other things.
Yeah. I don't think we should go down that
No,
that route.
but he signed Glitter. There's a wonderful story about how we signed Shawoddy Waddy to him, because I'd seen them on New Faces, and I thought, hey, they're good. They're a British sha-na-na. And I rang up the television company. And I said, how can I get in touch with them? They gave me their agent's number. I rang up the agent. I said, I'd like to meet your group, Shawadi Wadi. And he said, yeah, came along, watched them play, thought they were really good. And I said, I'll do a deal with you. And they said, we're doing a deal with, who was it? Polydor. No, it was Polydor. We're doing a deal, Wayne Bickerton at Polydor. And I said, I can get you a better deal. And they said, who with? I said, Bell, they're the best record company in the country. And they said, you can do that? I said, sure, I can do that. I went to Dick Leahy the next day, and I said, Dick, have you heard of Shawadi Wadi? He said, some group who were on New Faces earlier in the week. I said, not just some group. I said, they're good. And he said, I don't know. And his secretary said, Dick, I saw them, they're great. And he looked at her and he looked at me and he said, if she says that and you say that, we'll do it, do a deal. And we did a deal then and there on Shawadi Wadi. And
the other thing that always amazed me, because I can remember those days so well, is that because it was, I think it was something like a Saturday morning or something. It wasn't your opportunity knocks and whatever. But I was always amazed how you managed to get Shawadi Wadi. And I mean, as I said, why I would be amazed at the age of something like 11, God alone knows. But the fact is that one of your major competitors, and I could say competitor because, you know, you were both, you had Cat Stevens, the other chap had Donovan, you had Spencer Davis, he had Herman's Hermits. Mickey Most was on that show, wasn't he?
yeah, Mickey.
And I mean, I've always been amazed that you almost took Shawadi. Was it the fact that, again, he
didn't see it.
He didn't see it. He didn't feel it. He didn't like
Mickey
crepe shoes or something.
Yeah, no, Mickey was one of the great record producers, independent.
And you always said that he
Of the 60s.
good songs.
He was a song man. He would think they're never going to do any good songs because they couldn't possibly write great songs. He would always.
But their first single they wrote, didn't they?
Yeah, Hey Rock and Roll.
Can we have a little bit of Hey Rock and Roll? I mean, and again, now, oddly enough, with Hey Rock and Roll, I mean, as you know, I fortunately support, love you, Chelsea, just stop winning. Is that I always felt that, you know, I should go to the guy who owns Chelsea saying, look, every time Chelsea score, can we have a bit of Hey Rock and Roll? Because it just makes a change.
Hey, that's great because I did this I didn't do it, but one of my records did with rugby. Because, you know, every time the Harlequins score a try, today, and since they've been, they play Mighty Quinn, they play my record.
I didn't know that. Oh, I had no idea.
The whole crowd's going, the stoop. Going,
Come on,
hey,
with it."
rock and roll, bum, bum.
Because that is such a great,
That's a great
talking
dance.
about, a toe tapper or whatever, or you actually want to, because I think that Hey Rock and Roll should be played more often at football matches.
It's a good rock and roll record.
It's rather like, and again, I think, is Shakey's, you know, Hot Dog, You're My Babe, I think is another one of those songs. But I was always a little surprised with that, you know, with Mickey Most, and you obviously had again, we're not here to talk about Rack Records, we're here to talk about Bell and Immediate. But there are just, there are songs that, you know, one remembers, you just think, they're just imprinted on your mind, and you just think, Hey Rock and Roll, I mean, it's one of those songs. And again, I remember listening to Hey Rock and Roll, when you were talking about earlier on, Luxembourg 208. I can remember listening to the radio underneath my pillow at school and listening to Hey Rock and Roll. It was such a great song. But I mean, again, did the publishing that was with Bell, or did they? Who looks after Bell's publishing? Because you said that, you know, Dick Lee, he didn't, but you know, he was a big. So who was looking after the Bell kind of?
Well, here's the thing: they didn't have a publishing company because it's a conflict of interest. If you walk in and say to somebody, "I'm going to sign you up because I think you're the greatest thing since sliced bread," and you say, "I'm going to put you on my record label," that's that. If you also said to them, "I want to have your publishing as well," which a lot of people did, sooner or later they break the contract, the artist, because they'd say, "Hey, they took me for everything. Management, music publishing, records."
Well, wasn't that the big argument with Blackwell and and Spencer Davis in the end. That they basically took, Ireland basically took everything.
See, if you go back and say EMIs and Deccas and all these people, they had their own music publishing companies. When the music industry wasn't wise to how you could screw people, that was fine, because they took the money, they pulled it in, they made fortunes from it. But suddenly in the 60s again, people got wise to this and said, we're not doing this. We're doing our own publishing deal with somebody.
So, for example, Immediate, with all those, I mean, Steve Marriott being a prolific songwriter as well, and I mean, where did all, I mean, did Lou Goldham, did he, after having one of his long lunches and serving his blood, I mean,
I got to tell you, we've talked about record men and talked about pluggers and everything else, and you meet people, and sometimes in music and every other genre as well, of moments that they met people. I was making a record by a group called the Favourite Sons in 1965 in London, and the riff was the same as Satisfaction, bum bum ba da down, ba bow down, bum bum, and I was pounding out of the speakers. And as the music finished, there's a knock on the studio door. So the tape operator gets up, opens the door. There's a guy standing there saying, "That's a hit record." And I looked at him. I said, "Who are you?" "Gallico."
oh, Al Gallico.
He said, "Al Gallico, Gallico Music." That was the start of my friendship with the Mafia, with Gallico, because Gallico was a music front for the Mafia. And I met people who scared the pants off you, but they were so nice to me, because all I was a kid. And what was great, about really funny, one of the first times I came across two of them who took me out to lunch, and you get slightly nervy, it's in New York, and we're talking about things, and I suddenly thought, I got to make a sort of point here, and I said, my grandfather was Italian. And they sat there and went, good boy, he's Italian, the boy's Italian. Saved my life on a couple of occasions, actually, with them, because I got on with them like a house on fire. I wouldn't want to do anything else with them, actually, but it was great.
And whatever happened to him?
Gallico, we were friends for 30 years before he passed away. But he was a great plugger and a great music publisher. It's fantastic. And the first inkling I got of this, I went to Nashville. And Gallico...
Just with the Springfields or after?
After the Springfields. And Gallico said, we've just been voted the top music publishers in the country market. So I looked at him and I thought to myself, how can a guy who's a New York mafioso, how can he be top of the country charts? He's New York, he's not Nashville.
Yes.
And of course I realized why, because the country market was being leaned on by the boys from New York and New Jersey. Hey. And Gallico used to take me to places and he'd say, Michael, you see the sawdust all over the floor in here. And I say, sawdust all over the floor? I said, what's that? He says, to collect the blood. To collect the blood of it.
But how did these people get along with one another? So, I mean, was Andrew Loog Oldham in cahoots? I mean, were they mates? Larry Useful and Andrew Loog Oldham and...
No, they were all in competition with one another.
So basically they had an awful lot of buckets of sawdust.
Sure. That's very good.
So again, if we could play, please, Handbags and Glad Rags.
Because
I would prefer not the Chris Farlow version, which of course would bring back to Immediate. But thank you very much, son. Buy double feature, because again, it's like First Cut is the deepest. Is there the...
Whose do you prefer?
So Dad, you know, which one do you prefer?
A double feature, because there were a couple of postmen from Birmingham. And I really liked the guys. I thought they were great. They had good voices. So we did this, but there's a story about this record. I cut this first because I knew Mike Darbo, who wrote it. And
He's still a great friend of yours.
yeah, still a good friend of mine. And Andrew Oldham wanted to record it with Chris Farlow. So I got him first. I cut it first, you see. So Andrew would ring me up and say, you can't do this. I want to put Chris Farlow's record out. I said, well, it's too bad. We got there first. Ours is being released in 2 weeks' time. So I'm in the studios with them making another couple of tracks. And the phone goes.
One of them being a Cat Stevens.
Yeah, yeah. And the phone goes, and it's my ex-partner or late partner, Chris Bruff. And he said, Mike, he said, you got to help me. I said, what is it? He said, Andrew's got me in a car park near Charing Cross Road. I said, what do you mean Andrew's got you? He said, they're going to hang me out of the window by my ankles and drop me. I said, come on. And he said, no, he said, they are. And then the voice came on the phone. It was Andrew Oldham, and he said, Mike, we will drop him if you don't cancel the release of your version of Handbags and Glad Rags. We want ours out first. Oh, I said, come on. I said, Andrew, you know. He said, yeah. He said, we're going to do it. He said, I got the boys here with me. I said, Andrew, I'll tell you something. I said, you even go any closer to this. I said, and I will find you in a car park somewhere in London when you haven't got your friends with you, and you'll be very sorry. He said, you can't talk to me like that. I said, I just did. I said, that's it. I said, but because Chris is yelling and saying, they're going to drop me, they're going to drop me. I said, I'll go along with you for now. I said, don't forget I said this to you. And Chris arrived back in the office a couple of hours.
Gibbering wreck, I would imagine.
Gibbering wreck. And said they were going to drop me. And I said it would never have happened. Never have happened.
Really? You were that confident?
Yeah. Andrew was.
Oh, okay. Because the other song that Dad then did, a release, was a track called Moanin'.
By Chris Farlow.
Jazz classic.
Chris Farlow?
Yeah.
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 A jazz classic. Yeah, it was. Yes.
Well, Chris, well, I wanted a sitar on it because this is the 1960s. Everybody's spaced out. We're going to do a sitar.
love that.
Big Jim Sullivan was the top session guitarist. And he said, I can play the sitar. I said, really, Jim? He said, yeah, I'm learning now. I said, okay, let's do it. So he did this. I laughed and laughed. It's the worst sound I've ever heard in my life. It's hysterical. But Jim loved it. Jim sat there like an Indian. He sat there cross-legged on the floor. Oh, it was great. Lovely guy, Jim. Lovely. But couldn't play the sitar.
Well, it kind of, yes, it kind of speaks for itself. It speaks for itself, really. But whatever, I mean, yeah, it's like whatever happened to, but he had Handbags and Glad Rags after Moanin'. What?
But this all repeats itself. The Handbags and Glad Rags story is one thing. You could move on to Mickey Most in the 1970s with me, and So You Win Again. So You Win Again.
Hot Chocolate.
I get the song from Russ Ballard. I produce a record with a black American guy, Ralph DeBlanc. Everything else. Take it to Mickey, because I think I'll do a deal with him for Rack to release this. Mickey says, hit record, fantastic. I sit back and say, let's do the deal. So a week goes by, 2 weeks goes by, 3 weeks goes by, I haven't heard from Mickey. Ring up, yeah, I'm still sorting the contracts out. He said, it's just taking us a long time with the business people. Fine. Another 2 weeks goes by. It comes out on Rack Records with Hot Chocolate. So You Win Again. And I sat there and listened to that. I thought he screwed me by telling me he's going to do a deal on my version while making his own version a copy.
And you had known each other for years.
We'd known each other for years. And I was in with this guy's manager. I was in a club in London. Mickey Most walks in. And the guy, Ralph DeBlanc's manager, gets up and says, I'll go and say hello to Mickey. Do you want to come? I said, do I want to come?
Take it with
I said, absolutely not. I never spoke to him again. I never spoke to Mickey again. Because it's unwritten law, really. You don't screw somebody over something you've made yourself and go and make a copy of it and then run away with the money, which he did.
Can you think of any more examples of that?
Oh, there are countless examples of that. But no, So You Win Again was, for me, was the big one.
Well, because
Number one.
Yeah, I was going to say, because it was a huge hit record, and it is still probably Hot Chocolate's,
But that's life.
That's life. That's life. So, in all those years, is there a song that you would love to have
Yes.
recorded or escaped you when you had every opportunity of taking? What would that song
Well,
be?
you mean in an ideal world, if
Yeah.
I could say I'd do that? Good Vibrations by the Beach Boys.
Yeah.
Because I mean, Brian Wilson to me was one of the great record producers. I put him up alongside Phil Spector, and they're both mad as a box of frogs. You know, both of them were. But Brian Wilson and Vibrations, fantastic. I would just love to have done that because I love harmony singing, and that was a great. It was a symphony, Vibrations. And it's all about that. I want it played at my funeral. Can we have it played at my funeral?
Good Vibrations.
Good Vibrations.
Right, we've got that down on the podcast.
We have video record of it now.
Good.
But-
Well, what a finish to Good Vibrations, I say.
Yeah, if we can have a little bit of Good Vibrations.
It's somewhere.
We are sort of
And again, record producers, and I know very difficult. If there was a record producer, and it doesn't matter, you know, we're talking about today, yesterday, is there a record producer that you think, do you know, actually had everything, it was innovative?
Everybody thinks it's the George Martin and the Beatles. Not for me. For me, it's this. It's Good Vibrations and Brian Wilson. Brian Wilson, his mind, he wore a fireman's helmet and sat in a sand pit.
Oh yes, so he could feel the waves. And
This is total madness. The poor guy was a nutter. But by God, was he a record producer. I mean, to me, this is just, it brings back the 60s to me and the 70s. This record does, every time. And I remember where I first heard it. I remember. I was with Cat Stevens in Holland, and we were being driven down to Radio Hilversum to do an interview. And I suddenly heard a guy on the radio in the car say, "It's the new Beach Boys record, The Good Vibrations." And I said to the guy driving the car, "Pull over onto the verge." And he pulled over onto the verge, and we sat there. And I listened to Good Vibrations for the first time. And I felt so sad. You know why? Because I hadn't done it. And I wish to hell I had. It's wonderful.
And okay, I know you can't draw comparisons, but I'm going to ask you: Brian Wilson or Phil Spector?
Oh, Brian Wilson. It's the harmonies.
Because you did all those wonderful songs with that band, Summer Wine. You did the
Tony Rivers.
Tony Rivers. I mean, some wonderful, which is so. I mean, obviously, Brian, Beach Boys orientated.
Sure.
But and then of course, still, and again we're going. Sorry, folks, because we're going off Bell and we're going off Immediate. But you did that great. She's Not There, the Colin Blunstone.
But in a way,
but-
we're not going off Immediate and the other. I'll tell you why, because that record you're talking about, She's Not There, was on DRAM, which was Decca's new label, hip with it, smart label. That's what it
I
was.
love that hip with it.
Yeah.
But again, She's Not There. That was when, as far as I'm aware, that was your Phil Spector moment.
Yeah.
When you threw everything but the
kitchen sink.
kitchen sink in there. and as I said, I think on the last podcast, and I know we're going to wrap it up. And Dad, thank you very much. And I mean, there are so many podcasts I could. I will ask you. Because I know there are some great songs. Cherish. Just very quickly, can we just talk about David Cassidy? Cherish. David Cassidy, one of the biggest selling artists, wasn't he, on Bell?
Yeah.
And you always love your West Coast, the association and whatever. And as we said, the late, the 60s was very much the kind of era of music, rampant musical change. But Cherish was the association and the West Coast was fantastic.
The association were a really, really good group. They were East Coast as opposed to West Coast. That's the association.
Is it? No, this has got to be David.
Is that Cassidy?
This has got to be David Cassidy.
Yes, it is. You're quite right.
Well, it didn't matter. I mean, it's just again, we were talking about the rampant change in musical directions and whatever. But again, for somebody like David Cassidy to have such a huge hit record with a song like that.
David Cassidy was in love with your brother's godmother, Hoymer, and he really loved her. And John Brewer was another guy who was all walking, talking, do very little in the record business. And he was married to Hoymer. And he came out of a club one day, jumped into a Rolls Royce, was outside the front door, and he said, "Driver, take me to this, that, and the other." And David Cassidy got in. And he said, "What are you doing in my car?" And they were the same colours, his car and Cassidy's Rolls Royce, same thing. He just got into the wrong car.
Yeah, you didn't really want to mess with John Brewer, did you? Because
I did. I didn't care.
But again, different musical directions. He was 10 years after, wasn't he? Or I think 10 years later, was it?
10 years later.
10 years later. I love that. Oh, Dad, I can't thank you enough. And
thank you.
And if we can do some others in the future, because it's the stories that, I mean, so, pardon my language, but your generation, you've got so many stories, and you've got stories underneath the songs, underneath the artists, and then they'll be lost. And again, one of my most favourite moments was you and CP nattering, and you were just talking about your different experiences and the different artists, but all those stories are going to be lost to us listeners, and we're going to have a load more. So please, anybody who wants to hear further stories, just let me know, and I'll grab Dad, and hopefully he can. Yeah.
I love you, son.
And I love you, Dad. Thank you. Thank you very much for helping me out. So yeah, here we have Brian Wilson.
And that's a wrap.
What do you reckon, guys?
I thought that was bloody brilliant. I think that's
Do you mind? I've got to just
edit.
nip to the loo, my
so do
darling.
I.
Where is it?